Hi, I'm Max from Downforce Recordings, and today I want to talk to you about the new mastering grade limiter from Submission Audio, Flatline. So, straight into Cubase, this is it. This is Flatline by Submission Audio, Ermin Hamidovic's first own mastering plugin, and it looks awesome. First thing that I noticed when I opened it up, the UI is really nice, and you only have three main controls: threshold, shape, and output. And that's pretty much it. Everything you have to know for using this plugin, those three controls. That's all you need. I want to make a little TLDR segment here for people who just want to know, is this better than Pro-L? Because in my experience with people I talk to, most people in the metal and hardcore scene are using Pro-L as their main mastering limiter. So I want to do a little comparison where I level match those two and just compare it quickly. The red track is Pro-L and the gray track is Flatline. And I will just switch between the two. This is a mix I did not so long ago for a band called Shark Tank. And here we go. This is Pro-L.
Stand up, raise your voice, let the side.
And that's Flatline.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice, let the silence speak.
So, really similar sound if you adjust a little bit the shape control. But what I notice immediately is that the Pro-L track, you kind of can hear that the sides pull back a little bit and the mid comes forward, like the bass drum, the snare, and the bass. And with Flatline, that just doesn't happen. It just all gets louder and like more directly in your face.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice, let the silence speak. We're at with noise. Raise your voice.
And that's actually huge. If you're like working on a mix and you're just throwing a mastering limiter on it just to have something on your tubas, and then you're mixing and you're mixing and you're mixing, and then you take it off and your mix changes like Pro-L does, that's actually not very cool to have, because if you send it off to a mastering engineer and for him like the levels between the mid and the sides is different, that's just something you have to explain to him, or he has to like recreate the effect, this effect. So huge plus for Flatline here. The other thing that you cannot control with Pro-L is this shape that Flatline introduced here. This is essentially how your clipping internally will be handled. The less you have, the more smooth it will sound. And if you go up to 100%, you have like a more harsh clipping, but also more perceived loudness. Just check that out, how that works here.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice, let the silence speak. We're at with noise. Raise your.
So you can immediately hear like the transients sound different. Everything pulls back a little bit if you go down with the shape. And that comes in really handy when you're pushing the limiter. Like I'm sitting here, let's go to short term. I'm sitting here at like -9 LUFS. And now I will try to push it further and further and further, and I will adjust the shape while going further, because as you push the threshold down, at some point you have to adjust the shape, because then you get like weird artifacts and clipping, audible clipping.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice. Let the silence speak, words with noise. Raise your voice.
So that would be like my... There I would just stop with pushing it for loudness. There's like -6, -5, because after that it just gets annoying. Let's try to push it that far with just Pro-L. Yep.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice. Let the silence speak.
Like, I don't know what it is with Pro-L, but if you're trying to push it that hard, or like do all the lifting, like the gain that you want in the track with just Pro-L, at some point it just doesn't sound very nice anymore. So let's compare the two.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice. Let the silence speak, words with noise. Raise your voice.
If you notice, like just there with the kicks, the drra, those sounded super clean with Flatline, and with Pro-L weirdly distorted. And that's something that Pro-L doesn't really have, like that shape control. So great stuff from Submission Audio. The other things that they integrated here are some presets. I find it really funny that they even like have presets here. I think it's cool. But like with just 3 controls, and one of the controls is linked to the other, if you just use it as a mastering limiter, it's like, okay, like you can only adjust those 3 things. What good can any presets be? So let's go through some of them.
Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice. Let the silence speak, words with noise. Raise your voice. Go make it. Cause we forget to scream and fight. Stand up, raise your voice. Let the silence speak, words with noise. Raise your voice.
Okay, interesting. So in the presets, there's also like a tendency, the higher the like the gain reduction goes and the louder the preset gets, they all pull back a little bit on the shape, just to avoid like super harsh clipping for the transients. And this is something I will not play, because you can try it for yourself if you buy that plugin. Just do the Mick Gordon Doom setting and yeah, brace yourselves. I quickly need to change that. So this is one comparison. I also have another track loaded here, which is way smoother, not that aggressive. And I also used for this track Pro-L to master it. So let's try it with Flatline. Again, very, very similar, but again, in the Pro-L, somehow like the bass drum and the snare gets louder. Like, even though the loudness doesn't change here, it sounds different just because the bass drum and the snare gets louder and the sides pull back a little bit. So let's try to make this loud but smooth. And try the same with Pro-L. Yeah, that's all right. Like, I don't want to make this like all just Flatline is better than Pro-L, but I think Flatline does just like when you're going for a really loud master and you have to be sure that it's not clipping in a weird way, then when you play it like through a car stereo or anything, you just hear clipping and it's like sounding weird. That happened to me a bit with Pro-L. Not all the time, but quite a bit, and it's really annoying because you have to recheck everything on other systems just to check if your limiter is like producing some weird clipping that gets worse eventually when you compress it down to MP3 or something. With Flatline, if you want to be really sure, just go with the shape 100%, pull it down until you feel or you hear unpleasant clipping, and then you just go off a bit, and that's it. One big critique that I have with Flatline, I usually, when I use Pro-L just standard on standard mode, I always put minus 0.3 dB on my output. And if you're rendering it down to MP3, you should actually go like at minus 1 dB. To avoid, like when the codec gets changed and it has to resample everything, there is a chance that it will go above the digital 0 and then you have additional clipping. So with Flatline you can do the same, but there's one problem. Because those are linked, you have to adjust the output, but you at the same time adjust your threshold. So you unlink it. Then, for instance, we just choose minus 15 for the threshold and minus 14 for the output. Then we have minus 1 dB. Problem now is, if you want to adjust your master and it should still get louder or like still be in unison with your output, then you cannot do that anymore. Yeah, you can adjust the threshold, but the output stays the same, so you don't have the same like experience when using the plugin as before. And if you link it back up again, like this is minus 40 now and this is minus 15.5, I link it up, yeah, it stays the same until I touch it. Then it becomes synced again. Would be really nice if you can just adjust the output to minus 1 dB or whatever you want to choose, and then link it up again and use the threshold just as before. That would be really, really nice for an update for that plugin. So, quickly into another session. This is the same song that you heard before from Shark Tank. And I wanted to show you guys how to use Flatline as a clipper. just a clipper, not a mastering limiter, just a clipper. I usually use clipping like I pick out my samples for like kick, snare, toms, etc. and I clip the group to prevent transients from overshooting and making it easier for me to master it in the end. So I usually use JST clip in a very moderate setting because I don't really like how JST clip sounds, especially on like drums when you push it too hard and you try to gain like an actual volume jump with this plugin. So let's listen to it, how it sounds right now. Okay, let's try pushing it a bit. Like right here at the middle line, like at 12 o'clock, when you push after that, for me, it like it starts sounding thinner than it was before. And I'm not really gaining any volume anymore. And if you check the meter on the channel, when I go from 1 to like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, doesn't really like change much anymore. It's like internally it's clipped to like a certain dB number or whatever. So let's try the same thing with Flatline. So for using it as a clipper or saturator in general, you want to have the threshold and the output unlinked, because otherwise you like trick yourself all the time with the increase in volume. So let's try clipping it. Yeah, you immediately hear, okay, the transient is getting harder. It's like more perceived loudness. The output doesn't change that much. But now let's push the output and actually try to gain volume out of this. I will keep the meter of the channel here. That is really, really loud. Compare that to JST clip, where we also ended up at like minus 3.8. It sounds better, in my opinion, and you can get a lot more volume out of it. That's important because you actually want to gain volume out of those clippers, because you then have to do less of the volume like compression and stuff in the mastering phase. If you have like your drums and your guitars and your vocals already clipped and limited before you go into the mastering, it's way easier to get those loud masters sounding clean than just leaving everything natural, not clipping it and not using like much of a transient designer, and then just pushing it into one mastering limiter and then like pushing like plus 20 dB of volume just through one plugin. That just doesn't work really well. So that's just one example of how to use it. So now let's try bass drum. Same principle. I'm using JST clip to clip my group, to control the transient, and let's just compare the two. First mistake by me. unlink those. Really nice how the transient comes out, how the perceived loudness goes up. I'm not changing the output. Let's try to make it a little bit more smooth, because right now I think that will work in the mix. Like the bass drum will come through more, but maybe you want it to sound a little smoother. Okay, that sounds fine to me. Let's try to push it to get actual volume out of the plugin. How the bass will then change if we push the output here. Okay, let's try the same with JST Clip. Kind of the same effect. At some point with JST Clip, I don't know what happens internally, but I guess that the threshold gets put down, and at some point the threshold not only catches the transient but also like the bass content of the bass drum sound, and then you get like additional harmonies and additional distortion in the bass drum, which makes it sound muddy, which is like the least thing you want if you're using a clipper, to gain like a more pronounced and more extreme transient for your drums. So that was my review of the Submission Audio Flatline plugin. I think it's absolutely awesome, and it will replace Pro-L as my main mastering limiter, I think. Tell me what you think about it. If you think it holds up to Pro-L, and if you consider buying it right now, it's on $99, I think, as an introduction price. So if you found this video in any way, shape or form helpful, please leave a like and maybe a subscribe, and I will see you all shortly.